Hello, so this was a trend on, I guess, TikTok and Instagram last year, like months ago, of things I find incredibly chic or the height of glamour or rock and roll, but specifically chic was used a lot. I thought I'd seen it a lot from this Irish Instagrammer called Secondhand Huns. Her real name is Verona Farrell, and I thought she was doing it a lot, but I looked on hers and it is all the height of glamour and rock and roll rather than, she doesn't use the word chic particularly. But I did then see recently, even though she didn't post it recently, I saw Sophie from Bibliosophie do reading habits I find incredibly chic, and she talked about some of the other places that she'd seen it, the other people who had done it, and because I am so behind in watching watching YouTube, I am behind in bringing you my version of this video. But these are some of the reading habits I find incredibly chic. Now, I am not a particularly chic person myself, so perhaps I am the wrong person to bring you this, but these are reading habits that I think are cool. I think they are aspirational. They are definitely things I personally do not do. The first one on my list is annotating your books. I think that annotating your books is incredibly chic. Spending the time to respond to the books that you're thinking about, but doing it in such an instantaneous manner where you are writing things down as the thoughts are coming to your mind and they are specifically for you. I think that that's just so cool to be able to do that, to be that's relaxed but also engaged with the reading. So you're not viewing the book as a sort of precious object, but you're also not just reading mindlessly and not thinking about it. You are engaging with the text. Now, I would say I specifically think that it is chic when it is done in black pen or pencil, and not with highlighters, not with tabs, not with anything else, just this stripped back, simple thing where you are just writing thoughts, underlining things, going quickly, annotating with quotes. And I think the reason that I find that specifically to be so chic, there's nothing wrong with annotating in any way you feel like, or not annotating at all. This is not reading habits I think are morally correct. But the reason I think that that is, for me, more chic is because of the simplicity, the accessibility, and the utility of it. So a black pen is something that's much easier for you to cart around with you while you're reading on the go, something that is much more simple and present, rather than having all of your tabs and notepads and sticky notes and highlighters and things to make it turn into taking notes for a class. Having a pen feels much more immediate and much quicker and much simpler, and much more for yourself, rather than being rules or classroom based in the way that other annotation can feel, or precious, which other annotation can feel as well. There's nothing wrong with being precious, as I said. I don't want anyone to take any moral approbation from what I'm saying is chic or not chic. But yeah, I think that it is just more chic to be doing it in this simple way that doesn't feel so much about the aesthetic of the thing and much more about the use of the thing. I think for me, that is a much cooler, chicer way to do things, because it is less self-conscious, I suppose. Although, if you're forcing yourself to just use black pen when highlighters would make so much more sense for you, that would also be performative. So perhaps that would also be more concerned with the aesthetic than the action. But yeah, generally something simple, annotations that are for yourself. Very, very chic. Next is reading a lot of non-fiction. I find to be incredibly chic. I personally don't end up reading anywhere near as much as non-fiction as I would like, and I just think it's very chic to be reading non-fiction, but I would say not self-help, grind set, hustle culture non-fiction. I don't find that chic in the least. That's the opposite of chic. But just having a interest in a topic, focusing in on that, reading, whether they're essays, or the other thing I don't find chic is celebrity memoir. Memoir in general, not necessarily as chic, but having an interest, a focus, something that you want to read, something you want to learn about and know about, and you're getting that from reading, as opposed to the way I do it, which is podcasts or documentaries. I just think it's cool, and it's It feels, again, more like you're just doing it for yourself than reading a lot of fiction, because a lot of the stuff that I end up reading or we end up reading online is stuff that you've seen a lot of other people talk about, whether it is like recent or old, whether it's classics like people are reading Wuthering Heights now, or I read Clarice Lispector because everyone was talking about Clarice Lispector. Like, if you're reading non-fiction, I feel like it's less likely going to be because you saw it somewhere and more likely to be because you are interested in it yourself. And I think chicness is just that, kind of doing something for your own pleasure, your own learning. And I think also having niche interests, having something you want to learn about, or reading more based off of fiction that you've read, also incredibly chic and not something I do enough of. Now, going back to the annotating of books, another thing that I find to be incredibly chic is non-pristine books. I'm not someone who's particularly precious about the look of books, but this is even more than that. It's books that have been read and reread, books that have clearly been touched and experienced as a story, as information, as engaged with for their content, rather than something that is about their look and the aesthetic of everything. And particularly, I think I love secondhand books for this reason. I love the patina that they get from the life that they have lived, which this is purely about the aesthetic. For me, I do think that books that have that patina, that have aged, not to the point of falling apart necessarily, because that makes them hard to use for their intended purpose, but books that are secondhand, that are old editions, I really find to be chic. If you have like a collection of vintage editions that you hunt for in secondhand bookshops, like the one under the bridge on South Bank, or like the other like cool secondhand shops up around Bloomsbury, like if you've got a load of those like orange spined penguins, but they have like the 80s covers or the older covers, this is hunting for the aesthetic, so it's the opposite of some of the things that I've said before, but I just think there's something cool about them, that they're not like brand new, mass market. They're you know how I feel about Fitzcarraldo editions not having individualized covers? This is like the opposite of that. It is a really individualized cover because there are fewer editions of them. And similarly with books with non-pristine covers, another thing that I find chic is people that lend their books without preciousness about it. They're not like, yes, you can borrow my book, but don't dog it, don't do this, give it back to me in this time period. I get it, you love your books, but if that's your action, if that's your way of lending them, I think you should probably not lend your books to people. People who are just like, oh, I think you would love this book, and they just hand you a book and they don't necessarily expect it back. Like, it's just chic to not care so much about the book, to be really casual about it, to be non-precious. I think that kind of relaxedness around books is something that I think can be so chic. And similarly to people who aren't precious about lending their books, people who recommend books to you in person, I think is chic. So someone just handing you a book they think you'd love, or someone you know in real life being like, oh yeah, if you're interested in that, there's this really cool book that I read that I really liked, or they remember books you liked and then are like, oh, you liked that book, didn't you? Here's a book that I remember. It's that sort of thinking about other people, being able to recommend on the spot, having that like deep breadth of knowledge rather than me sitting down and thinking of 10 books that I want to tell you about that fit a certain like genre or certain theme. This is like off the cuff, in person, individualized book recommendations. Obviously, it's really cool when someone who works in a bookshop can do that, but I think even more than that, it's people that you've just met, or friends, or people that you know, kind of acquaintances, who are just sort of found some knowledge about books, who may recommend you things you've never heard of. It's not just like, oh yeah, I read this Booker Prize shortlisted, I read this best book of the year, I read this book that's being really hyped up on Book Talk. It's, oh yeah, this niche book that you might never have heard of that they can recommend. I think having that like breadth of knowledge and being able to bring it into conversation in real life, rather than people being like, what are you reading, or what do you want to, books, what do you think? Although I do think people who ask you what you're reading are also pretty chic. People who do that like spontaneously, asking you what you're reading, or have you read anything lately. I think those people are quite cool as well. As well as being relaxed about books, having depth and breadth of knowledge about books, I think is something that I find personally to be chic, and I also think the word chic is losing all meaning by this point. But people who read a movement, or who read a group of authors who knew one another, who interacted with one another, and whose works have effects on one another, I think that's really cool. Really cool. Like if you're reading, like obviously you can read like the Romantics, you can read all of those poets together, and then also read Mary Shelley, and then maybe Mary Wollstonecraft, and you can read that section, but also those interactions with one another, or whose works come out of a similar milieu, a similar time period. You're like getting a whole grasp on a time period, or like reading modernism and watching modernist films and stuff like that. Like I did do this. This is one of the ones that I have tried to do myself. I read Lesbian Modernists, which I do have a video about if you want to go and check that out. I read Radcliffe Hall and Virginia Woolf, Vita Sackville West, and so I was reading like people who actually knew each other in real life and their interactions with one another, and the ways that that plays in their work. I think that that can be really cool and interesting to get to know works and their relations with one another. I think intertextuality and reliance on one another can be a really interesting way to read, to kind of follow a train through a certain period that you are interested in. Definitely, I think that's chic to just go deep dive into an area of interest and go to learn more broadly, reading some of the lesser known people of that same time period. Like I know that there's a non-fiction book about the Jane Austen's library that's come out last year that talks about some of the books that Jane Austen would have read, and then going to read those books, I think that would be a really interesting deep dive. Similarly, something I find chic is people who read slowly. So my friend Simon, Footnotes and Tangents on Instagram, he does these slow reads where he read Wolf Hall and War and Peace and various other books. So he reads War and Peace over the course of a year and the Wolf Hall trilogy over the course of a year. He does all these deep dives and information about like the historical grounding and people who are interested in, people who are relevant to the works, like other works that would be interesting to read based off of that. Really deep dives into lines and characters in a way that I think is really interesting. So people who read really slowly and really like engage with the works that they are reading rather than zooming through them really fast, which I do. So again, I'm not saying this is a list of things that I do because I think they're cool. This is something that I wish I did, and it's something that I struggle to do because I'm producing content, but really taking your time to get to know a book and really like immersing yourself in it. And I think reading around it is part of that reading slowly and learning so much more. I think a lot of this recent stuff about like building your own personal curriculum has a similar vibe to this, about reading a movement and reading slowly and really engaging and immersing yourself in that, what you are learning about. I think you can get so much more out of it possibly if you read that way. I am someone who barely even reads multiple books by the same author. I am someone who barely even reads multiple books by the same author. I'm always like, I'm like complete distracted brain, just jumping around for the next new thing that's like shiny and attracted my attention. And I wish I could have more grounding and slowness and depth, and learn more and more about the book and the specific things that I am reading. Similarly to this is people who revisit books and make them part of their story, people who reread a book multiple times throughout their life, and who the reread, it gives something new to them every time that they read it. I think that that is just so chic to have this book that you relate to so strongly and that means something a lot to you based on who you are. I think particularly if you introduce yourself to a book as a teenager, getting to know them again as you grow up through your life and the different ways you will relate to the work, the different things you will get out of it each time you read it. I'm someone who barely rereads, but I definitely think that it is chic to have such a strong identity connected to the works that you are reading. So I've also written people who take the time to read deeply, but I think that that is something that I've talked about throughout all of this: annotating your books, reading slowly, reading a movement, revisiting books. All of those things are taking the time to read deeply, and I think that's a lot of what I think is chic, is reading things that are of your own interest, not being pulled around or influenced by the world around you. Obviously, to a certain extent, you will be, and there's no such thing as like a unique or completely self-directed interest. Everything will come based off of your own life experience and the world in which you live. Like, I'm not saying that you can be completely outside of that, but not focusing so strongly on the influence of the world and the new, and giving yourself the time to absorb into a time period or a interest. That's a lot of the things that I've talked about here. It's like letting go of preciousness about reading and also leaning into the depth and your own curiosity rather than trying to keep up with what everyone else is reading so you can be part of the conversation, which is definitely something I am guilty of. But my final one is people who aren't genre snobs, but also don't just read one or two different genres. What I mean by that is, obviously, I don't think it's particularly chic to be like, these are good books and those are bad books, and you shouldn't be reading romantasy or fantasy, or certain types of books are morally inferior or intellectually inferior. I don't believe that, and I don't think it's chic to think that. I think it is small-minded to think that way. But also, I don't think it's chic to only be like, I just read sci-fi or I just read romance and I don't really get out of that genre. It's fine to do morally, as I said. No, this is not about what is moral, but I don't think it's chic. I think it is chic to be able to get outside of your comfort zone, to explore things you wouldn't have considered reading about before, and to see what else might be out there. There are genres I don't read, but I definitely think this is the one that I'm the best at. I don't judge any genres, I will try any genre, and I definitely read more than one genre, so at least one of the things on my list that I think is chic is something that I already do. The others are just things I can strive for, I suppose. So what do you think? Do you agree with me? Are these chic? My ideas of depth and slowness and self-direction and curiosity being more chic than newness and novelty and being part of the conversation. Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. Are there any things you think are chic that I didn't mention that you think I might add to my list or I might argue with you about? I would love to have an argument with you in the comments down below. If you're new here, my name is Roisin. I put out new videos fairly regularly, so I will see you again very soon, and thank you for watching. Bye bye.